right, so let's put this together, shall we? So we start with this mixing bowl, popping it on the scale. You want to turn it on and have it tard to 0. All right, first water. So there's 2 ways to do this, and I work with folks who do both. One is a full loaf and one is a half. And so my guide shares both. I'll be walking through both options with in terms of as I share the ratios. But for the purposes of my loaf I'm baking today, it's gonna be a half loaf, which I love because we get through it in a day or 2, never go stale, never waste bread. So for a half loaf, we're going for 212 grams of water. And that's gonna be about, this is where it can be fun to play with. So you can add an extra 10, 15, 20 grams, play around with a little bit higher hydration loaf. So I'm gonna go about 230 here, which is fine. 212 to 230, somewhere in that range is gonna be great for you. This is where you get to have some fun playing around with it. So once we have the water, we go ahead and set that back to 0. And now it's time for starter. So we zero that scale out again. And now we will go ahead and add some starter to our water. As you can see, this is nice and bubbly, very active. Lots of bubbles, lots of activity going on in there. And so now I'm gonna go ahead and pour this in, and we're looking for 100. So for a half loaf, 100. For a full loaf, we're looking for about 200 grams of starter. Once again, with this ingredient, over or under 10 to 20 grams, not a big deal. Remember, you wanna make this a fun and enjoyable process and not one that's going to stress you out. So thus far we have about 212 grams of water for a half, about 425 for a full, about 100 grams of starter for a half, 200 for a full. What you're looking for when you add the starter is that it's floating. So you can see here that this starter is super floaty. Woo! And once you have the starter and the water together, then you want to go ahead and mix it. So here I'll just mix it with my hand until you have kind of just a milky water. No, I mean there's lots of science to this, but no science in terms of exactly how milky or what it's supposed to be. Just get your hand in there, swish it around, connect with the process. It's nice to get your hands dirty, wet, startery. Okay, so now we have this milky water. We're gonna put that back there on the scale, like once again, zeroing it out. And now we're gonna add flour. So I really, really love a combination of organic unbleached white flour and einkorn. And I love the jovial einkorn flour. It's my favorite. There's the jovial all-purpose. You can play around with lots of different ratios. One thing to note is that if you're working with any sort of whole wheat flour, you're going to want to add at least 10 grams of water because whole wheat is going to really suck in a lot of that moisture. So you're going to have to add more moisture to it. So these are both all-purpose, organic unbleached white all-purpose, and then organic all-purpose einkorn flour. This isn't actually an ancient wheat, and a lot of people with intolerances to gluten tolerate einkorn a lot better. So for a half loaf of flour, we're gonna go about 325 grams. For a full loaf, about 650. The actual breakdown of the ratios is not super important. This is where you get to have fun playing with it. I'm probably gonna go about 2/3 to 1/3. So 2/3 white to 1/3 einkorn. So just looking to get to a total of about 325. So we're adding in. Now I'm gonna go for some einkorn. And again here, a little over, a little under, not a big deal. Flour is added, zeroing it out again. And now we're gonna add salt. So a couple options here. If you're getting really, really nuanced with the way you bake, you can wait to add this till we put it in the standing mixer. I've gotten to the point where to make this process work into my life, I add the salt now. So zero it out, depending on how salty of a loaf you want, anywhere from, for a half loaf, 10 to 14 grams. For a whole loaf, anywhere from 20 to 30 grams. So zero it out here. We're gonna add the salt now. I'm at 10, I like a salty loaf, so I'm gonna add another couple, there we go, going for 12. And this is the fun part, now you get to start to get your hands really dirty. So we've got all the ingredients, and now, getting your hand in there, you're gonna go ahead and mix that up, scraping off the sides until everything is nice and combined. And this is where you're beginning to give your loaf some structure. So really get in there and make sure all that flour and water and starter and salt are combined together, scraping off the sides, starting to see it meld into one sticky, doughy ball. And getting it really nice and well combined. Now, there are two ways from here to go. One is to get it in the standing mixer, which is the easier way and the way that I actually love for the crumb. If you're doing that, getting it super, super well combined at this point is not super important because it's going to get plenty of time getting mixed up in that standing mixer. If you're going to be doing this with the stretch and fold by hand, you really want to start to get it well combined. In any case, you're looking for consistency, which I will show you in a moment. Get all that flour and dough off your hands. You're looking for consistency here where there's movement in your ball of dough, but it's not super, super wet. So when you tip, it should move down the side of the bowl, but not drip over the edge. Nice and slow there. We call this the shaggy ball. And now we wait. So you'll leave this here to begin the leavening process for about 20 to 30 minutes, depending on what you got going on. Maybe you go put your kid to bed, maybe you start dinner, let it sit, let it hang out, and we'll come back to it shortly. All right. Now it's time to feed the starter. So I get questions about starter all the time. My sister's texted me at least 3 times asking if she's killed hers. It's really tough to kill a starter. So So let's talk about how we feed this. So now you've just put all your ingredients together, you've started your leaven, and now we're looking to feed your starter. So because I've already discarded by putting some of the starter in my loaf that's preparing to bake tomorrow, I don't need to discard. If you are not baking anything but you need to feed your starter, just take some utensil and scrape it out. In my ebook, I have a number of recipes that you can follow that you can use the discarded starter for. But if you aren't in a place where you want to bake or make anything, you can just discard it into maybe the compost or the garbage. So discard it, and now when it comes to discarding, it doesn't have to be any specific amount. Just ploop some out, or maybe 100 grams, 200 grams, depending on what you're making. And now to feed, all we need is flour and water. So this is my 1/3 cup, and I will fill my 1/3 cup to the top, just a gentle brushing off. So 1/3 cup of flour, and I'm gonna just pop that right in there. And then I use my same measuring cup and fill it just below the top. So you're looking for the ratio to be just a little bit less. And then I will go ahead and dump that in. And then from here, you wanna take something ideally not metal necessarily, wood or rubber, and you want to get in there, and this is where you got to put your muscles to use. So you're getting in there, and you want to see air pockets as you stir it. You want oxygen to get all throughout your starter, because oxygen is what makes your starter grow. It's what makes your starter happy, just like a human. A lot of people get weird about their starters, myself included. This is Willow, she has a name. I'm feeding her, so she needs water, food, and oxygen to thrive. Scraping it off the sides, getting everything well combined. Try and get as much of it off whatever your stirring utensil is. I like this wooden fork thing because of those prongs, it gets a lot of oxygen in there. And then you'll close it up. Ideally with some way to allow some oxygen in. So this isn't like I'm sealing the same as I would seal a mason jar. This rubber here, and I have this linked in my guide, allows for some oxygen to get in. You could also just use a cloth of some sort with a rubber band, but I really love this jar. And there she is. And when it comes to feeding your starter in relation to timing to bake, you want to feed it depending on the temperature. So let's say it's a really warm day, you want to feed it about 3 hours before you're going to begin the leaven process. And if it is a cooler day, maybe more like 4. But I've also baked, not having fed it for 6 hours, sometime that day. So really thinking about somewhere between 3 and 6 hours, again, working this process into your day. You want to feed your starter so that you have a happy loaf. All right, so now we have our loaf. It's been sitting. It's actually getting more structure. You'll notice that it's moving less quickly. So it's still moving, but it's starting to get a little bit more structure. And I'm going to just go ahead and take my scraper or your hands and make sure that none of it is super stuck on the bottom. So scraping it off of each side, off of the bottom. Trying to get, again, as much of that dough to stay in the bowl as possible. And then I have my standing mixer with the dough hook. So you're gonna choose this. Now, if you don't have a standing mixer, what the next step in the process will be for you is a stretch and fold. And so what you'll do here is you'll get your hand in there and you'll pull up from one side. So you'll pull up, stretch, fold it over, and then repeat on the other side. And it might help actually to get your hands a little bit wet. So I have a little bit of water. You're gonna pull up from the other side, stretch, fold over, and then you're gonna do that from each side. Stretch, fold over, and stretch, fold over. And then if I wasn't putting it in the mixer, and that's what I was gonna do, I would do that about every 30 minutes for 4 to 5 times, you know, over the course of the evening, and then just put it to sleep overnight when you go to bed. Because I'm using a standing mixer, I won't need to do that again. So instead, I'm gonna put mine in here. I like to make this process work with my life, not the other way around. So I secure that down, secure this down, and then set it on the very lowest setting for 20 minutes. So we'll let that bad boy go for 20 minutes, and then we'll come back to it, scrape it into this bowl, and say goodnight until tomorrow. It's time. So 20 minutes is up. Stop it. Lift. And now this is the texture we're going for, the consistency. It should be kind of dripping off of the dough hook, which a lot of people think that now they have a dough that's too moist, but in actuality, this is what you're looking for. Overnight, as it ferments, it's gonna get a lot of that texture back and that more of that structure. So you're gonna scrape this off the dough hook, get as much of this dough as you can into the bowl, and then take the hook off. And now we're gonna get this dough into our bowl for its overnight ferment. So again, we're gonna scrape it off the sides completely. We want all this goodness to make it over for that overnight ferment. Scrape it into the bowl. If anything's left behind, try and get that all out. It's okay to get your hands dirty when you're making sourdough. In fact, it's important. You actually get some of the bacteria and our natural yeasts from our body into the sourdough, which makes it that much more special. So now we have our dough sitting ready for an overnight ferment. You want to seal it in some capacity. I like to use a bowl that comes with its own sealable lid. And then when it comes to fermentation, again, it's going to depend on temperature. So if you are in a place where it's really warm in the summer months, you want to probably keep it to around 8 to 10 hours at room temp. If it's cooler, you can go ahead and let that sit for up to 15. If it's going to go over 8 to 10 hours in the warmer months or over 15 hours in the colder months, you can slow the fermentation down by putting it in the fridge. So let's say I'm putting it overnight to ferment. It's 5 p.m. and I'm not going to get to it again until, I don't know, maybe like 9 a.m. tomorrow. So what I would do is leave this on the counter until I go to bed. So let's say that's like 9 o'clock. It's had 4 hours fermenting at room temp, and then I'll put it in the fridge, and then tomorrow morning when I'm ready to bake, I can pull it out and begin the next process.